Well, thank you all very much for attending. This is the third SafeConnection webinar, and we've been getting some great response and great feedback from the audiences out there. And we have the same panel, some of the same panelists with us today, and a few new guests. But for those of us who, for those of you rather, who are just joining us, just a little background. The idea for these expert panel webinars came end of January. I was at a conference and I was just listening to a lot of people giving advice, and I thought it would be great if instead of listening to people who didn't have any skin in the game, if people could actually hear from leading companies, people that I consider and David Hughes considers to be experts within the field, and just talking about what are you actually doing where the rubber meets the road. So, you know, what do you believe in terms of reliable leading indicators? What would make you change the course of the ship? You know, is leadership really what it's all about? How do you deal with the issues of 24/7 safety? You know, things that have been sort of, you know, serious injuries haven't come down, but recordable injuries have. So listening to people who actually have to make the decisions for their companies. But when the COVID crisis hit, obviously, you know, everybody obviously wants to know, well, what are these leading companies actually doing with COVID? And so the first one we talked about just that. The second one was sort of dealing a bit with the return because it was quicker than everybody thought. And this one is about the remote possibility of behavior change, or if you will, trying to seize the opportunity that this crisis has given us in terms of people potentially being more acceptable to distance and remote learning. And the panelists that we have here have got a fair bit of experience with this. So if I can, just give me a second and I'll introduce everybody. Alex Carnival is back again. Alex has been the Chief Performance Officer at eTex, a lot of other corporate managerial positions, and they've got operations, I think, in 5 continents, and they make building products at eTex. Dr. Wada is, I met Dr. Wada at a conference in Prague in January, or sorry, just in the fall, and then we were speaking again at another conference where he was the moderator in India, and then another one in Kuwait. This is all just before the COVID crisis. And so if you ask just about anybody, ladies and gentlemen, for the authority of health and safety in the Middle East, almost everybody will tell you, go talk to Dr. Wada, because that's what I was asking for. I wanted to find, you know, who should I really be talking to in the Middle East. So Dr. Wada, thank you very much for joining us today. And we also have David Bianchi back from Epiroc, and their headquarters in Sweden, but they have operations all over the world. Everywhere there's mining, basically, they'll have service operations. So a lot of experience with remote learning. And also, you know, they're definitely going to be trying some things in terms of, you know, behavioral change remotely. And typically, you know, things like leadership, diversity, ethics, behavioral safety, they were all considered that you had to do those in person in a classroom, you know, group dynamics, group exercises, all of those things. And even then, you know, behavior change was still a bit iffy. So, you know, to take that and to try to do it remotely, obviously, is a bit of a challenge, but there's, you know, huge potential benefits if we can all manage it. So if I can, Alex, let me just start with you. Like I said, I think operations in 4 continents, but it may be 5. So if you can, maybe just tell us a bit about what's happening in South America, because we're all a bit curious. I can't remember if you've got a plant in Brazil or not, but it's a bit of a hot spot. And then just in terms of some of the remote learning, do you think we're going to be able to seize any of these opportunities?
Sure. Yeah, I'd be happy to, Larry. Yeah, as you mentioned, we do actually, ETEX does have a solid presence in South America. It's more of our factories are in Europe, but I think there's about 12 or 13 factories in South America across 5 different countries. And whereas what we're seeing in Europe is really somewhat of a return to, I won't say pure normalcy, but at least operations and things coming back in cooperation with governments and cooperation with the general protocols. South America is definitely more of a challenge, and I think it's what we consider, and a lot of people consider, a hot spot right now for a couple reasons. One, the numbers themselves and the numbers of cases in a lot of the countries are still on the increase. And two, I think the infrastructure in terms of healthcare and in terms of the general social infrastructure in a lot of the countries is more of a challenge. So the challenges in terms of operations are a little bit different by country. In Brazil, ETEX is operating, I think, but has had to take very much our own position in terms of setting up the protocols and setting up the healthcare and the tests and trying to make sure people are safe within the operation, because there hasn't been as much of a national standardization around that. In countries like Argentina and Peru, we're not able to run, and it's not because the factory isn't ready. The people are ready, and we've got protocols ready to go, but the countries there have taken a more stringent position in terms of not letting non-essential companies or industries run, with I'd say a wider definition of what non-essential is than what we may have seen in Europe, for example. So there, it really is trying to be ready and obviously still trying to take care of our people. You mentioned the remote learning. I think there has been opportunities for it. I mean, I'll start in South America, because we had actually had some good experience doing things outside of the factories. I mean, SafeStart at home had a better traction in South America for us than really in almost any other place in the world. And part of that is cultural, but I think we were able to build off of that. So as people have been outside the factories, the safety leader there, who I think you said was on a call with you guys in Spanish last week, really set up a good program to really ask people to make their own videos. And that's one of the things now with the technology and with the phone technology, almost anywhere around the world, people can make these short videos and about telling their SafeStart stories. So even though people haven't been in the factories, they've been able to share SafeStart stories and pass it forward and pay it forward. So that's almost a form of the repetition and the application of what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I mean, and at that one video that you showed us, I can't. It was a really good song. I can't believe almost that he didn't try to make a hit record with it instead of, if you will, donating it to the SafeStart cause. And I also have everybody. I should also introduce David Hughes. He's our business development manager for Europe, and also Paul Clark. Paul Clark is the owner of GLC, and they put on some excellent health and safety conferences around Europe. And David and Paul's job is to since they talk to so many industry leaders out there, it is just to compare and contrast what our panelists are saying with sort of how does that reflect on the general community out there. So Alex, certainly some opportunities in terms of things like receptiveness to just anything behavioral. I found Latin America to always just be so much easier than a lot of other places. Like you were saying, especially certainly the home component. If I could then, let me come over to you, Wada. And just if you could, I should also tell everybody that in addition to being with the corporate health, safety, and environment at ENOC, Emirates National Oil Company, Dr. Wada also does a great deal of consulting with directors of huge multinational companies and the CEOs as well. But, and those folks, I just find as long as you talk really slowly, everything's okay. I'm just kidding. But you're now doing some of this kind of behavioral, I would say very difficult behavioral change, Wada. and you're doing some of it remotely. But just before you tell us about that, just tell us how things are going in the Middle East, because none of us have been able to travel, and we'd like to know. I would anyhow.
Okay, thanks, Larry, and it's a pleasure to be on this webinar today. Firstly, what's happening in the Middle East? Well, I mean, like in many other parts of the world, it's been pretty disruptive, especially here in Dubai. Dubai is has a massive number of transiting passengers coming through the hub. So in January and February, obviously, there was a lot of people coming through, and it's also a very much a hotspot as a tourist destination. So we do have people coming from all over the world, and in recent years, like in many countries in the world, like Italy and Europe, the Chinese also like to come and spend their holidays in exotic places like Dubai. So as such, by around about end of February, by March, we did go into a quite a severe lockdown for around about a month, and then slowly there's been a bit of a release. During Ramadan, it was a bit of an interesting Ramadan period here, because obviously Ramadan is a time when we become quite nocturnal, because there's a lot of activities happening in the evening, social activities and congregations, prayers, etc., which became very difficult because obviously so the lockdown then after basically after 9 o'clock in the evening, there was no more people going out except those who had to work with a permit. So it was a bit of a different Ramadan. We spent it with our closer, smaller families, and then slowly after the end of Ramadan, after Eid, we slowly started opening up a bit. We were very cautious during Eid because we're big families and big tribes that like to visit each other during Eid. It's very customary. So the government was and the leadership themselves, right from the top leaders within the country, were basically urging, especially us as nationals, to not have these big congregations during Eid, just to make sure that the older folk who are part of our families were not affected inadvertently by people who are carrying maybe the virus without knowing. So it's been interesting times, but we're coming back now after the lockdown, and economic activity starting to come back, and I think stuff will start coming back to normality. I think normality is, I mean, there are two questions. One, are we going to have a new normal, or what's the new normal going to look like? And then also, I think what's important for us to appreciate is that economically things are going to change. There's a lot of things that are going to change in the years to come. So that's maybe a very quick brief update on what's happening in this part of the world. So we're looking forward to hopefully better days. This summer is going to be an interesting summer, because I don't think many of us are going to be traveling. Generally during the summer there's a huge a lot of people are traveling, but I don't know if that's going to happen this summer, although obviously we've started resuming things. So you asked me, Larry, about working with directors. Yesterday I was talking to an executive leadership team from an organization, a manufacturing organization, and they I was telling them that looking at the new normal, I mean, the optimists are saying, look, within the next three months we're going to go back to some sort of normality. We're going to be able to live with this virus like we live with other things in this world, and some other more well, they say it's realistic, but more pessimistic kind of outlook is that it's going to take years, 1 to 3 years for things to go back to normality. I don't think, if you ask me personally, I don't think we're going to go back to normality as we were before, and perhaps we shouldn't, because it was a bit of an unsustainable way of living. I think one of the winners in the coronavirus was the environment. We saw how the environment was started getting a lot better, and I think that should be a good lesson for us, that you know, it's good. You know, the environment can recover, and I think we should just live in a more sustainable way. I'm an environmentalist by training. I studied environmental engineering as my basic degree, so I still remain, you know, very much attached and true to my first love, you know. So.
Well, did you? But how did it go with you know, with the board of direct? Like when you were talking with it was a webinar that you did for the company Wada?
It was a Teams meeting. It was a Teams meeting.
And
No,
did it go okay?
Yeah, I think it went okay, because I think that they started getting used to having a discussion online. I also got, you know, obviously crash training in the last 3 months in making presentations online, and I think it went well. I think I still think that whilst we can communicate like we are today on this webinar, I still feel that there is, you know, it cannot give you that same 100% that, like, when you're sitting in a room with people, because, you know, the kind of give and take. I was asked many questions, and in fact, I was supposed to be there for an hour. It took us about 2 hours to do this discussion, but it was really good discussion, really good questions, and there was a high level of interactivity. But you asked me about boards and executives in general. I tell you, one of the issues is also having meetings online with pizza. I mean, I sit on several boards. I sit with the Energy Institute in the UK. I sit with the OCIMF and other boards as well. I think, you know, we're getting used to it, and I think that, yeah, I mean, I can see in the future more of these meetings taking place that way. But there is still other concerns. You know, for example, security. Are we going to discuss things? Are things, you know, do you still have you know, the Chatham House rules, you know, when you're having discussions online, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of directors would in a room together. But the last thing I want to say, with regards to focus on HSE issues or occupational health and safety, and probably the old occupational health and safety and welfare, I think a lot of leaders are starting to understand the importance of having the right kind of crisis management plans and pre-plans in place to manage issues and have that flexibility and the redundancy. My discussion yesterday was really focused about high reliability organizations, and how do we move organizations from being really at high risk to high reliability, and the kind of the transformation that needs to take place in leaders pushing an agenda to pulling the organization and motivating the organization to move forward. So
okay. Well, Wada, thank you so much for that. David Bianca, though, I got to make sure I use the right one. Well, just a bit about you know, how you're dealing with South America, if you could. Sweden is where your headquarters is, so they didn't lock down. So you know, just a quick update there too, because it's always interesting. And then maybe tell us what you've done in terms of remote trainings, David, and a bit of your plans coming up to take advantage of the opportunities.
Sure. Thanks, Larry, for the invite back again, and to my colleagues. Yeah, our situation, of course, being a multinational, international company, is varied like the others are. And what Alex said about South America is dead on for our experience as well. So it's kind of what we're watching right now very closely. Some of the mines in the countries have not been considered essential. So they, in fact, are shut down in some of those countries as well, which in the US, mining and any kind of production that relates to mining, including in my facility in Garland, Texas, near Dallas, where we build the drilling solutions rigs for above ground surface mining, has been operational the whole time. And Sweden has been operational the whole time as well. So there's a varying component of that in terms of what people are doing. We've got a lot of work from home people. we've started to slowly ease that a bit in the US, and it's kind of in response to the general easing, but it is wrought with potential issues. And we're starting to see a few of those with people coming back, and then they're being in the facility and maybe they're exposed to someone who is tested positive, and now they have to go back to not being in the office, and that it's really more difficult with production people, of course. So so it's a very dynamic situation, and when you start to crack the door open, you know, just like the virus itself, its issues start to creep in, and you've got to be ready for those. And I think that's the important thing. The one thing I've learned about this is just about the moment you think you got your hands on it, you don't have your hands on it at all. It's got its hands on you. And so that's my warning to anybody would be, don't become complacent about where you're at, because you're not where you think you're at as things progress. And as far as remote learning, which, you know, being on our topic and all, the key here, I think, in that is that the E in e-learning needs to be effectiveness, because that's the issue. Can you be effective? You know, can you be effective in remote learning? And engagement is really critical, and collaboration, and that tends to dilute the more people you get on a call or the more people you get in training. It dilutes if you don't have video feeds going and you're doing audio only. So, I mean, there's a lot of techniques that you need to employ in order to keep things going. And as was just stated about a meeting, you know, some of these go a lot longer than you think when you have good engagement. The opposite can be true. They can go much shorter when it's like talking, is everybody on mute? You know, does anybody have anything to say? Where's the dead silence? So it really does take a different perspective than you have in a live situation where you're able to really gauge that much more closely. So to say it's dynamic would be the understatement of the century, probably.
Well, yeah, I mean, so I was I'll ask Wada, come back to Wada and ask him some more questions too. I'm going to be doing a leadership session for leaders of a company in China. But it's a very well-run, very positive culture company. I've talked to the leadership group there before, but I've like you said, I've spent my whole career in person training people, and you get to see them and you get to see whether they're getting it or not. And you do fly a bit blind on the webinar, hoping that everything's working. On the other hand, I think what's really important is whether you are dealing with a willing learner or whether you're dealing with a non-willing learner. Because if it's a willing learner, then a lot of opportunities open up to you remotely that you may not want to risk, you know, in terms of behavior change if it's an unwilling learner. Paul, thanks very much for joining us. And I know you get to talk to a lot of industry leaders out there on a fairly regular basis. So, in general, are they going to be trying to seize the day in terms of trying to do a lot more training remotely, and have many of them considered even the possibility of behavioral change, things that typically were the domain of, you know, instructor-led classroom training?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's an interesting conundrum. I mean, I've just been listening to some of the panelists. Now, remember, I'm not a boots on the ground kind of guy, and I just got to state as well, we're HSC Global Series, not GLC. I don't want a lawsuit on my hands.
Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry.
It's okay. It's all right. I just thought I'd better say, just in case someone's watching. So there's a few things. Now, it's really interesting. If I went back to Wada, that we were talking about the evolution of how we engage via video. And I think it's been a powerful transition. I think you can't take away that human element. I'm an events organizer, so I understand the benefits of that face-to-face human element of engagement. I don't think that will ever die or go away. But obviously in between that, is filling the gaps. You know, the senior leaders, like a lot of people on this panel right now, need constant engagement of new ideas, new content. What I find really disturbing, and you know, correct me if I'm wrong, is kind of the word normal. Normal's like 3 seconds ago, right? I think the one thing that we tend to do in business is we fight against the grain in being able to move forward a little bit quicker by kind of accepting what is and proceeding forward. We yo-yo in the environment of normal. And what this current pandemic has done in terms of turning it into a benefit, and this is what I'm trying to advise a lot of my clients, is actually seizing the opportunity to do things differently and actually drive a sustainable and progressive safety approach. You know, we've all craved differentiation, we've all craved change, and we have an opportunity in the face of what is a diverse situation to think differently, to act. We're forced to become better leaders, and I think that's powerful. I think that's a really powerful opportunity. We kind of dabble around, you know, we've created some sort of political warfare globally at the moment around the topic of differently over safety two, over behavior, over hop, where there must be, from an outsider point of view, a utopian system from which we can all come together and gain momentum and really transition to change. I personally see, you know, caring about health and safety. You know, I'm in health and safety. I run events. I'm the ears of a lot of senior leaders all over the world. I think we're forced to be better leaders. And, you know, we've done some really good work with Todd Conklin presently, who was talking about bouncing forward in the new operational reality. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity make for leadership challenges in our organization. But we're now, with safety being under a dramatic shift over the last several years, post-pandemic, safety has the potential to bounce organizations well ahead of the old methods and ideas. And I just think that's a great outlook. You know, safety is no longer about the management of injuries. It's safety now sits at the management table and provides expertise in developing and maintaining the capacity to work in a constantly changing world. So we have to seize the opportunity in the present moment. I think we've got to work away from the word normal and start thinking about what Wada said, which I love, is a sustainable and progressive safety future.
Well, Paul, thank you very much. Whoops. It seems like every time I go to talk, you know, I lost my voice. No, it's not COVID. It's just need a drink. David Hughes, if you get to talk to, well, certainly lots and lots of our customers and stuff. Lot of people interested now in actually tackling or, you know, behavioral change with remote learning and distance learning.
Yeah, we've seen a quick shift with some of our more agile clients already with remote programs in train and have started already making an impact and that change and reaction to the situation. But I think we were well positioned for that, or they were well positioned for that for two reasons really. And the first is that this is a convergence of necessity driven by the situation. Business still has to go on, but we've got to find a way. And then also we've been helped, as we've referenced already, by the technology being able to be utilized and deployed quickly and in this way to deliver, you know, remote behavior change, which obviously is the main topic for conversation here today. And I think people have grasped that there are two main sides to that remote behavior change influence that organizations can have. The first is through good management, just good old-fashioned coaching and management of individuals, of teams, of people. And there's been an enforced change with more managers being remote from their workforce. The workforce is being remote as well in some instances as well. So that use of the technology there, I think, has been highlighted. But also then we've got the other way of delivering behavior change en masse, culture change, when you get enough people in an organization moving in that direction. And that's probably a little bit more difficult. You need to have a more structured program. You need to have tools to deploy, as well as the technology to deploy it. And for both of those, I think what I'm seeing is people's understanding that there needs to be more touch points, more frequent touch points, and there's more onus on management in both of those elements. Obviously, direct coaching of management, they clearly involved with that, but also more involvement with management in helping to deliver those tools and techniques that will drive behavior changes as well. Instead of kind of outsourcing that responsibility to an external organization, there's a realization, actually, we've really got to put our money where our mouth is on this and get involved. So I think that's happening already. We're seeing that, and realization that you need more frequent touch points and more targeted use of the tools that we've got, as well as the technology being the media. It's just a methodology. It's not in and of itself useful to drive behavior change, but thankfully we've got it to a level now where it's capable of supporting both of those angles.
Well, I think I think, I know talking with you about this before too, there's a couple of things that are important to differentiate. One of them is, a Candy learning course versus remote delivery, where it's live, just the person delivering it isn't in the room with you. And there's, it's okay, the technology isn't perfect, but it certainly enables remote delivery versus, like, if you will, a Candy e-learning course on, a P-trap valve or something. And then the other part of it is that you don't just, like, I think it was Ed, one of the North American panelists, Ken Tuden, was saying, you need to have a deliberate practice. You can't just have, there has to be something where your supervision or like you were saying, David, your management is following this up. So it isn't just, take this and let's hope for the best. Now, once people do take, remote learning or remote delivery training, Alex, whatever, it's not in the classroom. And hopefully there are some live touch points with a supervisor, or at least a coworker, where they get the ability to relate some of this to each other, share stories, whatever it is. How would you recommend people measure their performance in terms of remote learning and things like that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this, and I thought about it a little bit after you asked me to prep it. And I think in one sense, the structure of measuring or managing the performance is like anything else. You find the right KPI, and then I think have a follow-up with it. What I think the challenge is here, and I'm going to build off a little bit about what Paul said about living in the VUCA world as well as doing it remotely, is I think it requires us to put much more time up front before even doing or designing the training, to think about what is it we really want to accomplish out of this. And specifically, what do we want to accomplish from, let's say, the higher levels of learning assessment? Not just, do I like the training, but what do I want as far as people applying it, and what do I want as far as an end result for the business or for the enterprise? And I think by asking those questions, those are the KPIs that you want to try to determine. And then obviously there's work to do in terms of making those KPIs as clean and as simple as possible. So it may not be as simple as saying, I want safety to be better, right? But it may be something that's specifically in there. But I think, to me, the point of emphasis is trying to come up with KPIs that are application and action oriented, in terms of what are people doing actively coming out of the remote learning. Are they having discussions with people? Are they doing something that's measurable or trackable in terms of a behavior change? Are they teaching it to somebody else, right? So there's ways to do it once you start thinking about it but I think you have to think about the KPIs up front as far as being action oriented and applicable. And the reason why I say I build off of what Paul said is because I think we can all be guilty when we're thinking about the normal, about just getting caught up in the stream. We're doing what we're doing now. Let's do a training that does the next sequential item. And when you're living in the VUCA world or you're living without the normal, you don't even think about where you are today. You're thinking about what is it we want to do, where do we want to go, and then build it from there. So it is a little bit of a different mindset.
I feel lost because I don't get the analogy of the buka world, Paul. You've got to tell me just before we go any further so I could care. What is the buka world?
VUCA is the anagram for the four things that Paul said. So volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous.
Oh,
that's
okay.
the world that we live in, right? And so I'm sorry I abbreviated it, but that's if you hear the VUCA world, it basically means that's the high ambiguous world that we live in.
Okay. In terms of, I guess just for the audience real quickly, the 4 levels of assessment, if you're talking to an educator, are the first level is, did you like it, right? There's typically what we do a lot of in safety, happy sheets. The second level is do you understand it, which is, typically a pencil and paper test like you might have to do for to get your learners perfect for driving. The third level is can you apply it? In other words, so what you were saying, you could talk to other people about it. Could you share a story about it? Could you watch a video and pull out the concepts of it? And then the fourth level is, did the training actually achieve the desired result, which typically in safety is, did we reduce recordable injuries or serious injuries? So we do a lot of level 1 and we do a lot of level 4. But you could do a lot of level 3 just by going out and talking to people as a supervisor and talking about what the training was, or how do you apply what we learned in the training, right? So there's certainly some ways of measuring some of that sort of stuff. David, Bianca, I was going to ask you what do you guys, I know you've got some plans in terms of doing some distance learning, but also following it up with some deliberate practice. So I don't know if you could talk to us a bit about that combination, or why you believe that combination is going to be successful.
Well, the fact of the matter is that the training that is, historically gone on has been, in our case, a very high percentage has been live training. We've implemented in the last few years a competence portal for training, and now we have what we call Epiroc University. So I think we're trying to move from a training model to a learning model. To where people are actually more learning about subjects and interacting with that in the role that they have, and being a little more prescriptive and giving people more options to select various learning opportunities. So we're enhancing the amount of training that's available, training material, but learning engagement through other platforms like LinkedIn, for example. So what we're doing is really opening up a portfolio. We've also gone in agreement with a third party with actual university type courses to engage people at a deeper level in the areas of their profession, or things beyond that, maybe the soft skills needed and engagement in those kind of learnings that are done electronically as well. So really, the platform has opened up because partly because the time is available, in the sense that people aren't in the office for a lot of the time, and they are not distracted by other things and pulled into a lot of other things that they might normally have happen. So it's really provided an opportunity to enhance the competence and capability of people in areas that normally maybe weren't attended to as much for personal development. And I think that's a real strong thing, because once you do start to engage back into business, and I'll say business as usual in the sense of the demands are back and all of the inputs and outputs are running more in the way that we would expect from the past, then the question is, do we have a better set of tools and knowledge in place within the organization, to accomplish this thing? And I think that, and I'm like Paul, I'm not big on the term new normal because norm doesn't last very long anymore. So we need to say, what's the new infrastructure? What's the new competence that we expect within an organization? Because the people at the end of the day who are going to be tasked the most by this whole thing is really the managers, the supervisors, the people who are quote unquote leaders. We're going to separate the leaders from those who are pure managers, because traditionally we tend to move people up in the organization based on their capability, but sometimes that's a technical capability and not really a managerial or a leadership capability. And then you start to see these things waffle a little more. So I think we expect that maybe we're going to have a better grasp of that realistically as we go forward, and have a better chance to have better leaders in place because of this interruption in service, so to speak.
Well, David, I mean, I'm not looking for decimal point accuracy here, obviously, but you said like pre-COVID, most of the training that you did would have been live, if you will, in-person training. Post-COVID, where would you, like, if it was 80-20 before, do you see it being more like, 30-70, 60-40 now, or?
Yeah, I would say, and there's probably two answers to that. One is during this bubble, and then one is when it settles in. So I'd say when during this bubble, it's probably 20-80, 15-85. I mean, it's very little in-person training now. I would say it's going to settle into maybe the 40-60 kind of a realm, 40 being on-site and 60 being remote learning is what I would just estimate.
Okay, all right. Dr. Wada, what would you like in terms of, well, you could speak from Enoch point of view, or also from your other your consulting business that you do with Robert, with the the directors and the executives. Do you see do you see your business shifting to doing more remote training, more more board of directors meetings remotely than before? And can you give us a ballpark percentage of where you see that moving?
Well, I'm listening to what's been said. I think the best thing to say is that we really don't know, because during the time when there was a lockdown, people turned around and to be to sort of, I think, guess to be positive, and people thinking that, look, we were moving towards digitization. We were trying to push organizations, we were trying to push people towards digitization and using the technology, leveraging on the technology. And COVID came and sort of stepped on the put the metal, put the pedal to the metal, whatever, they sort of accelerated all of this happening. Now the question is that really, for this to be sustainable, I think it's more going to be driven not by the quality, I'm afraid, but more by the convenience and the cost. So you could now do a NEBOSH, whatever, IGC certificate, and do the training, which usually would have cost around, say, in this part of the world, around about, let's say, average $2,000 for a 10-day training with the exams and everything. That cost is about, I think right now it's about 25% of that cost to do the training online. Right, so I think, I mean, it's the same qualification, mind you. Now, I wanna say something about risk management, because I think it's really important, and I think it's very timely now to discuss this. And when we talk to leaders, we sort of gave this example as well. So the introduction of new risks, yeah. So one of the issues, I mean, we have to walk around with one of these, right, all the time. A lot of people wear gloves. I just keep my hands clean, But sometimes you have to wear gloves, going to the supermarket, going to certain places. So now think about this. I'll give you 3 examples. A worker goes back to work, has to wear gloves. So he wears his gloves, and then he's working, say, in a plant, and where there's hot surfaces, and then he puts on his leather gloves, right, on top of the plastic or the whatever the rubber gloves that he's wearing. And then he doesn't realize that whilst using these leather gloves, the heat is still being transferred through the leather onto the plastic gloves, which can then cause him 1st or 2nd degree burns without him even realizing this, right? So this is one thing. A lot of people in the plants and stuff like that, they have dedicated, obviously, smoking areas, and they take a smoke break. When they go for a smoke break, they take off their gloves, and and obviously the first thing you want to do is clean your hands. But there aren't wash stations next to smoke dens or smoke whatever shelters. So what they do is they go and they probably pull out a bottle of sanitizer alcohol, and they sort of rub their hands with it before they take out the cigarette and start smoking the cigarette. So what happens? We've had cases where people have actually got quite serious burns because they're using it. So let us talk about the impact, and I think, and this is why we have to understand the kind of risks that are being introduced, in fact, into the workplace. So this is risk management. This is risk management. Well, there's risk governance, risk management, and risk assessment. There are 3 levels. Risk governance is what boards and executives need to understand. Risk management is what managers and supervisors need to manage, and risk assessment is what every single person needs to do. You and me, every employee within the company, because you're managing your own risk. But you need to do so. I've seen so many companies. I mean, I worked as an auditor for many years, as a technical auditor. I was the chief compliance officer here in Enoch when I used to manage HSE a couple of years ago. And one thing I used to find is that there were many risk assessments, and many organizations that I talk to now, they say, yeah, we've had risk assessments. Many of those risk assessments, have not been revised and they haven't been looked at for such a long time. They become completely out of date and they become completely irrelevant. So it's very, very important that what we need to do is to get people to understand that the first thing they need to do on the return to work policy is to go back and do a risk assessment. And the risk assessment needs to be dynamic, because as David was saying, Paul, before that, whatever the new normal is going to be, the new normal keeps on changing every 2 days, So you need to keep that.
Do you see them? Do you see them being able to do any of that, like prep work? Because it's necessary for sure. Can any of that be done with the workers prior to coming back remotely, or are you guys planning on doing more of that remotely in the Middle East, do you think, or is it going to be just a mix all over the place?
Yeah, of course, in the Middle East, we have other challenges. We have a lot of transient workers, especially with the contractors. We have 170 different nationalities who work in this country, Larry. Some of them, they don't even speak, like, for example, the Indians, they don't only speak even common Hindi. Some of these, they will speak their own dialects. And in India itself, there's about, there's 14 or 16 languages which are approved languages, but there's actually more than 100 different languages and dialects. So, it's not easy to do this. And then we have the luxury of having laptops and computers and stuff like that. There's a lot of people that you want this information to go to, and you need to communicate to them. I mean, they don't have a laptop, right?
Yeah, right.
And I fear that there's a lot of managers. I'm sorry to say this. A lot of managers, they have what I call the Marie Antoinette, kind of syndrome. You ask them, well, why don't they do the training online? Because it will save us cost. And yeah, but they don't even have a computer, and that's why when Marie Antoinette was asked, well, why the people revolting?
Yeah.
Instead, so we have to be realistic with this.
I agree too, Wada. I mean, it's got to be deliverable over a smartphone, and companies got to at least provide a computer for them, so that if they don't want to use their phone, they don't have to. But normally, if you tell people, hey, if you want to use your phone, you can. Most people do. If I can, Paul, we got about 10 minutes left, and I want to check the chat line and just see what questions we've got coming in from the audience. But in general, are you finding that companies out there are really going to try to seize the day in terms of like shifting sort of like, like from 20/80 to, 70/30, 60/40 the other direction? Or do you think it's just sort of a temporary thing and they're going to go back? I mean, I also agree with you, like it's not just live, it's also the networking at some of the conferences that's really valuable too. And that's obviously impossible to do on a remote platform, really. I mean, we can do this kind of a thing, but what would you say, like if you had to sort of pick a percentage change, Paul, in terms of the UK and Europe, how much do you think the needle's going to move after this crisis is over in terms of permanent shift to remote training?
Yeah, it's a good question. Firstly, I will say, I mean, I think it's important to mention I think we've got some in South America, and we've got obviously Wada in the Middle East. Sometimes I think, just kudos to them, because, they're not just dealing with, a UK workforce, they're dealing with multicultural workforces. A lot of countries and regions are dealing with multicultural workforces, which I can only imagine is a massive challenge in itself. So, I'm not a boots on the ground kind of guy, but kudos to you, because I wouldn't even know where to start with that. But, the transition, I think, I'm not sure about whether the online training, I've got a couple of clients that provide. I know you guys are fantastic at what you do as well at SafeStart. I've got a couple of clients that, all they do is, hit a whiteboard physically in the room, and they can't do their job as effectively virtually. So I think there's an element of future normality, and we can't put a norm on, we can't put, an exact on what the norm will look like. And I love that. And that's where I live, consciously I live in the fact that everything is ever evolving, ever changing. That's the beauty of life, right? We'd be bored, wouldn't we, if it was all the same? We're in this to face this together. I think there's two things that I think is what we train on. I think there is time for the predict and prevent element. I think definitely, procedures are always, they're not going to go away, and they're an incredibly important part of your roles. But I do think, and I mentioned this before, that we do need to train on being more resilient and to think on our feet more effectively. This current pandemic, I think we talked about it last time, that, the organizations that have really truly struggled are the ones that weren't prepared and didn't have the right procedures in place in the first place. That's a scary thought for any organization. But, in the future, how do we become more resilient? How do we build resilience? How do we build capacity? How do we transcend our predict and plan to adapting how to be more resilient and adaptable as an organization? And I think that's the really important part. As an events organizer, we're coming into hopefully being able to run physical events again, safely, socially distanced, hopefully. But do you know what? We've seen a huge impact in these virtuals. We've been able to supply people with techniques, tools, content, engagement during times when we thought, to be honest, as a physical events organizer, we were going bankrupt. But we found a way, because we were able to bend in the storm like a beautiful reed instead of a tall oak tree, to be able to adapt with the climate. And I think that's the thing about safety. True safety is about, I guess, being presently able to move with the market, and I guess work together from a leadership perspective. But adaptability, resilience, and capacity, I think, is the most important thing.
All right. Well, thank you, Paul. And just now, Alex or David, Bianco, they were just either for Alex or David. Anything do's and don'ts, anything very important that we should be aware of with remote learning? basically, I think what they're looking for, any big pitfalls or any warning signs. I gave one already, which is don't just tell people to do a course and expect their behavior to change without any kind of, follow-up deliberate practice or when you said it before, David Hughes, touch points or something that, there's got to be a lot more touch points because you don't have any. You don't have any in the classroom really now that, I mean, you can always, if somebody isn't getting it, you go over, talk to them one-on-one at one of the breaks and sort of see if you could get that person to come around a bit or whatever, very, very little of that when you're actually delivering the training. So, if I was going to give people a tip, it would be one, what you said, David, it was lots more touch points, like double probably what you had planned from before. But Alex or David Bianco, what we got a few minutes.
I think that was what I would say too, Larry. I mean, I think building in interaction as much as possible. And then I think the other thing that would come to mind for me is, as much as possible, try to keep it focused or keep it simplified. And it's probably more important to do it when you're talking about this type of medium than when you're in a face-to-face. When you're in a face-to-face, it's easier to imagine going off in different directions or going in tangents and things like that. I think it is important to try to have a grounding and to try to challenge yourself to keep the core mission, the core goal of remote training fairly focused, and then I think the other things can come into play.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah,
David,
Bianco,
if I could, I was going to say, a bit, you've done a fair bit of all this sort of, so, if you could just, fill us in.
I'd say set expectations, communicate ahead of time about what it's going to be about and what your expectations are so that people know that, because sometimes people just open an invite, they accept it, and they don't really, and then they show up. And so if you can engage them ahead of time to let them know what it is you're expecting, how it's going to go, and then while you're doing this training or learning sessions, keep it very interactive and have pause points to where you actually engage the audience in questions that are relevant to the topic. So you then can gauge engagement, and you also can verify learning as you're going, or learning or misunderstandings or something that wasn't clear. So you don't get just, in motion and going, and you've lost people in the first 10 minutes, 15 minutes and didn't even realize it. So the level of interaction and engagement with some planned pauses and interaction, I think, are critical to building the value of that time as you go.
Yeah, how important is the measuring of the activities or the frequency of those activities? In other words, like is that part of what you'd measure, Alex? Is like measuring the activity, the touch points and all of those things, making sure that that was like a KPI in something like this and that they understand, like that communicating the importance of all that up front and then measuring it, is that something else that would be important for the success for?
Yeah, if you combine a little bit about what David just said and what I said before, it's trying to find the KPIs that would be on the application or the exit side of the training. And I think doing the thought up front, and then to David's point, setting the right expectations, is important. And the one thing I build off of what David said is another good technique is to actually ask people to do, a little bit of homework or pre-work that they would present in the remote learning. In other words, that puts a little bit of their skin into it. And I'm not just showing up to watch a video for an hour, but I'm actually going to be asked, here's a question that has been asked of me, and you're the moderator, the leader is going to ask for my input. And that I think sort of gets people engaged. When you're waiting to have to answer your question or you've had to prepare something, I think it brings a little bit more.
Like a panelist on a webinar, that's a good example.
Yeah, well, no, and I think it's another interesting point, Alex, is that I think you could actually get people to do some pre-training prep on their own. Whereas, prior with the live training or whatever, I would try to assign some pre-reading or things like that, and invariably half the leadership group would do it and the other half wouldn't have. And you've got just the worst scenario to start with, because you can't start without half the group knowing what you're talking about, and the group that did their homework kind of gets punished. So it's just awful. But I
Right.
think you could be successful with it remotely, much more so than
I think,
if
and
you
I think
gave
if you
people
do,
homework before the training and they're like, I'm not going to do any homework until I figure out whether I even buy into this training or not, then maybe I'll do something, right? But remotely, I think people are just a little more accepting. I don't know. We'll see.
Sorry, Larry.
Yes.
Larry, sorry, I really have to. I really have to
Oh,
go.
Wada,
Thank
yes,
you.
please. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us, and hopefully you can be with us again in a couple of weeks, Wada. And I know you're joining us again for the Middle East, Asia, India one in a couple of weeks as well. So good. Thank you so much for joining us today. Really
Thanks, Wada.
appreciate it.
No
And
problem. Thank you.
just
Nice meeting you.
before
Thanks.
I say goodbye to everybody else, I was just going to ask David Hughes if you got a feel for what will happen post-COVID in terms of, the percentage of remote training and learning that most companies will be doing versus where they're at now. Just
Yeah, I think it's difficult
your
to
sort
say.
of guess at where's our business going, David? Tell me.
Well,
love
it's
to know.
difficult to say, but I think we won't ever go back to where we were. That's for sure. And I think there's actually some benefits or reinforcement of what we already knew have come out of this experience, which will help us, whether it's remote or classroom-based delivery of these programs. And picking up on Dr. Wada's point and David Bianco's point from a few moments ago, look, you can't just rely on the training. You never could just rely on the training or the program to deliver the behavior change. What we need is managers to lead. And it's funny because if you think about it, a lot of behavior change programs in safety and in other areas, albeit they're usually dressed up in whatever the latest psychological fashion is of the day. Essentially, when you boil it down, what they say is, leaders, go out, talk to your people, listen to what they say, agree in action, and then follow through. And essentially, that is just good management. That's what supervisors should be doing anyway. And that, is part of the engine that's going to drive the behavior change, whether it's done remotely or face-to-face in the future. But certainly, if the training is going to be more remote, we are definitely going to rely on that piece of the jigsaw to happen better, more often, more frequently. And therefore, our managers are going to need the skills to be able to do that better than in the case.
Sorry, Dave, I think the question is going to be how that we have to make the remote training work, because I think there will be a lot of companies, and I know this discussion has happened within ETEX, where the work will change. People will actually work remotely more, right? It's sort of been found out. I don't think it'll be 5 days a week, but already there's going to be things where companies will go to more remote working, less time in the office. So I think there will be a necessity to do effective remote training and learning, more so than what it was 3 months ago. I think that is a real change.
And day-to-day management as well, those skills need to be better.
Yeah, and even I don't know who what Wada was saying. I guess just getting a bit better with, like, I used to just talk on the phone, and now I try to talk FaceTime or something like that, and see people, right? Because I don't get to go to India, or I don't get to go to China and go see the folks anymore. So it's I think you're right, Alex. I don't think it's ever going back. I think everybody's like, look, there's a lot of stuff that we've been paying for that we don't need to pay for.
And it's not an either or. It's not going to go all the way back. It's not going to stay all the way remote. It's going to be these different modes of communication and connection. It can be phone connection, it can be video connection, it can be face-to-face, it can be group, it can be individual. It's and that it's just a matter of how that ratio plays out. So I think you're never going to want to eliminate all personal interaction. There's value to it. There's all networking, as you mentioned. There's a real place and a real value for it. But if we sit there and honestly say, did every face-to-face meeting I ever had 6 months ago, was that the most valuable way to do something?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Get used to a new term. It'll be called hybrid learning.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but I also, I agree with you though, Alex. I think there's a lot of, there's a lot of things that we're not gonna, like, both Paul and I, we're gonna keep doing conferences and in person and forums, and you know that there's things that just never, like, you know, it's different. On the other hand, and it's also more powerful sometimes too, especially hearing a speaker live. Like sometimes it can be really quite moving, right? On the other hand, I've also been live with the expert panels. That's where I met Dr. Wada in India. And I think this format, the webinar format, is actually much better for that than sitting up on stage with 500 people looking at you, and the guy beside me pulls out his phone and starts checking his email. I can't even kick him because there's not a curtain in front of the table. And I'm like, oh my God. But, you know, I mean, I think this is actually is better for this kind of an idea sharing forum. And also then it's a lot easier for us to get questions from the audience and so on, right? So I think it'll never be, I think we're going to be doing a lot more of this in the future. And certainly I'd like to have you back, all of you, to talk about your trials and tribulations of doing more remote learning in the future. We're pretty much out of time, everybody, so we're going to say goodbye. But the next webinar is in 2 weeks, and the original plan was to just call sticky behaviors. In other words, you know, what good things have we seen out of this, and how do we make them stick, or how do we make them last? But we'd also like to hear a bit from our panelists about the just dealing with denial, or what is the state of denial. As David Bianchi said on one of the previous webinars, there's 2 levels to this. There's the surface level, and then there's the deeper level. And I think if we're going to win this battle, we're going to have to win it at the deeper level, not just at the surface level. So like to hear your comments on how you think your companies are doing, and how you think, if you will, the communities around where you operate are doing, because that's got a tremendous influence on the people as well. So again, thank you all very much for your time and for joining us. Those of you in the audience, thank you very much for attending, and thanks very much for the questions. And hopefully we'll all see you again in 2 weeks. Okay. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Take care.